You know, with how many spin-offs Pokemon has, it's honestly quite surprising that Pokemon Mystery Dungeon somehow avoided the list of spin-off games that could be summarized by who cares? As most of us would assume, there's gotta be some kind of reason for that. And today, that's why I'm here, to explain how that is. To find out how Pokemon Mystery Dungeon was the only spin-off of relevance, or at least for the first 2 games only. It makes you wonder if Generation 3 or 4 have some kind of bias. Yes, of course they do. Obviously, we can just leave it there with the originals from the GBA and the DS. Oh no, we'll even be peeking at the Switch's remake today. Of course, to talk about Pokemon Mystery Dungeon, Red Rescue Team, Blue I guess, and of course Rescue Team DX. Meaning it's time for us to cut the intro, as there's 2 games this time to dive into. In order for us to find your persona, to fail at knowing mailboxes only open from the front side, and of course learning why stealing is bad. Let's begin. So first, we're just diving straight into the gameplay, because setting the stage with the world through the first 20 minutes of story just isn't going to be worth it, you know, just to loop back to that point later. And luckily for us, the gameplay side of the Pokemon Mystery Dungeon series is easy enough to understand. But of course, there's plenty different between the originals and the remake, leaving us with peeking them both separately. So first, we begin with the originals as a bit of a gateway drug by talking about how the Pokemon battling system was adapted into this weird dungeon crawler experience with odd rogue-like aspects. So first, before the actual board play, we gotta take a look at our chess pieces being the Pokemon. And the Pokemon themselves are a bit silly for basic gameplay purposes. They have the 5 stats, HP, alongside physical and special versions of both attack and defense. An actual speed stat simply does not exist. They can also have 1, if not 2 abilities, should they even have 2 to begin with, as a possibility. And of course, they always have access to 5 total attacks, 1 attack that does typeless damage that is shared amongst all Pokemon, with 4 unique ones being based on the main series attacks, while also featuring the ability to run the same attack multiple times in their moveset should they get it from a TM. Chances to dodge exist, friendly fire, and a few more things we will see later. Obviously, Mons fighting Mon, or multiple Mons, and that covers the basics, which means it's time we get into the actual gameplay part and delay a few more Pokemon bits and details for later. Meaning yes, it's time for the dungeon part of Pokemon Mystery Dungeon. Look, when you get to pop into one of these, they're randomly generated and your goal typically is just to brute force your way to the end, which that end is set by each map, sometimes even featuring a boss to boot. There's more objectives like rescuing fellows from dungeons, item deliveries, and escort missions that are all a part of the job system, meaning yes, randomly generated missions that are somewhat optional, but we'll come back to that one later. Losing comes down to you or your main partner feigning, or of course failing an escort mission, but the real gameplay is reaching the stairs to go to the next area, constantly needing to be ready to handle the mons coming to spit in your face and end your career. When it comes to actually fighting them, you essentially have your 5 attacks, 4 of which are limited by PP, and one of those PP limited attacks can be used via a button shortcut. You get access to a handful of items, and the simple but very real strategy of just running away. But it's not all sunshine and rainbows, because of course status conditions and similar effects have to exist, meaning getting hacked out is pretty possible, although if those were all you were concerned about, I got one phrase for you. But wait, there's more. Weather obviously finds itself included, a hunger system that'll start killing you should you not consume food items, just like in real life. Even featuring an in-floor timer that'll instantly KO you if you stay on one floor for too long, obviously trying to intercept you from recruiting certain mons. Terrain, of course, having a habit to hide ambushes, as some mons can walk or fly out on the water and lava tiles, fly over abyss terrain, or of course, ghosts just walking through walls. A corridor blacking out-esque feature, essentially being a fog of war type mechanic to hide mons and other stuff. Floor tiles that have their own effect, like one that resets drop stats, and any of the hidden trap variants, which is just flat out garbage considering the counterplay is so scarce. But hey look, adaptability is pretty important with the series. Adaptation is so important that one moment you're just minding your own business and then there's a monster house. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, you in fact picked the wrong house, as items littering the field will be your only real clue to the horrors that could possibly occur against loads of monsters spawns with traps everywhere. Well, unless you have attacks that can clear out everything at once. Then it's just a silly EXP farm, which is arguably a good trade-off. But of course, the true horrors come in when stealing from a shop mid-dungeon, where Kecleon in all of his might gets to resize your rectum, just obliterating you instantly with little hope for survival. Unless it's like one of 3 cheese strats to handle the sped up onslaught coming your way. Remember gamers, stealing is bad, even when it's sometimes morally correct. While that covers most of the battling stuff, we gotta slow down just a bit, as the spin-off adaptation for attacks is at least somewhat faithful here. Attacks that target one mon usually, and I cannot stress this enough, usually hit the opponent in front. Some can cut corners, some get extreme range because they need it. Multi-hit moves in this series are insanely broken, only hindered by accuracy. Of course, you have attacks that can wipe entire rooms on the spot, and others that we're just going to completely gloss over. Okay, but get this. What if you could attack, but more than once? Yeah, somehow the game that lets us use a default attack without using any PP thought it was okay to link together potentially your entire moveset to tear through any single mon in the game. It's called balancing, and I swear this game needs it, which is funny considering how many openings this feature allows you to whip out in terms of strategies and potentially making the game easier for your skill issues. Items have a pretty strong presence in the game, almost overbearingly so. In the originals, you get access to 20 items in your inventory at any point, and +1 for each mon to hold an item for themselves, meaning storage space is extremely limited across the board. And it gets worse when late game and especially post-game dungeon length gets unreasonably long, as simply preparing for those trips just becomes a flat-out nightmare due to the tight inventory space. A plan to bring several max elixirs so you can actually fight, powerful orbs that for game balancing reasons cannot be used against bosses, food items for the hunger system, probably an HM, etc. It really snowballs the limited space in your inventory in a way that's not very desirable. Unless, like a normal person, you just entirely ditch the idea of specific items and just take 20 reviver seeds due to them being an all-in-one stupidly bonkers tool. Oh, did you die? Oh, here, have all your PP back and hunger. Have fun! Just because the game at times just feels a little too restrictive, and if you perish, you will lose money and potentially all of your items, because of course, a roguelike element like this had to be here to punish you for losing. Meaning that cuts it for most of the mechanics, meaning we finally come back to the mons. So how about team building, huh? Beginning that off, we'll have to pick the starters, as picking one isn't too simple here, as your starter is determined by a personality test at the very beginning. Meaning it'd be pretty annoying if you simply wanted to pick your favorite. That yes, the gender choice does in fact lock off certain options. Meaning if you want the best starter, you better be a girl. Although at least on the bright side, you can pick your partner. It's a fun feature overall, even if getting what you want is a bit of a headache. Looking back at the gameplay, we got something big to look at, being recruitment. The recruitment system in these games suck quite a lot when looking at it. As to get a mon, you first have a luck chance on defeating a mon, based on stuff like a mon's recruit rate, your team rank, and of course your level for some reason. Then the mons you recruit in the stage are from an odd select pool rather than just being anything you can fight. Meaning some mons can be recruited, but others can't. It's just arbitrary on who it could be. Most importantly is the real hurdle here of just keeping the mon that you're recruiting alive until you beat the dungeon or escape orb out. But of course, the simple fact that you cannot recruit a Pokemon at all unless you have their friend area already, with a few exceptions that is, genuinely hurts a lot. Friend areas being the one big annoyance, as you have to buy them to recruit things, mixed with the vast amount of mons locked to post game, is generally not very pretty at all. Yeah, you can talk to Wigglytuff to see where the mons will go, but that's not helping too much. Your biggest issue comes down to the EXP system, because you'll end up recruiting mons and you're gonna need to have them to tag along. Oh, that's so cool. They're not helping, they're dying constantly, and relying on you to carry them, which is an issue because of the team slots, as you can only ever bring 3 Pokemon into a dungeon and get 1 mid-dungeon, made worse when the team size comes into the picture, as there's a 6-point size cap, meaning 2 of the large Pokemon cannot be brought together on the same team. And, that's about it. This just makes fetching EXP a little bit harder than it even has right to be, due to your mons being just significantly harder harder to slot in, unironically making me miss grinding in the mainline games, despite how bad those used to be. Just bringing recruited mons along is just so needlessly problematic when it comes to playing the game. It hurts the experience quite a bit when you're just simply not using the system, and the EXP mechanics are not helping it in the slightest. And for our last real gameplay feature to mention for now is IQ skills, essentially additional skills granted to Pokemon via forcing gummies down their throats. The skills here are all shared unlocks among every Pokemon in the game, but of course when you get the skill it's only on the one mon. The issue with this system, if any, is just how long it takes to get the skills in the first place, especially considering how mid the early ones are, so they don't end up being that useful, just alongside the fact that you're not even able to use all the skills together, as a handful of them just do not have overlap with other skills of the same type. Although we do have choices here to be made, at least putting in some brain power at points in the game. It's a nice feature, just slow. Anyways gamers, that covers it for the core experience. Pretty nice with a few shortcomings, but against all odds, these would soon be addressed. Moving towards the remake, however, quite a lot was changed to modernize the experience, weaving in many gameplay aspects from the later games. So with the Pokemon first, specifically the starters, the game made the selection the same, but just more accessible. While the personality tests still exist, it doesn't force you into a specific choice anymore if you don't want it, allowing you to pick anyone. Yes, even the gender-locked starters. And furthermore, the starters themselves actually have scarves now because they need them, to denote them separately from other mons of the same species, which is lost on evolution for some reason. And of course, a much stronger selection of starting moves, which yes, they absolutely need them, all jokes aside. But as the starters are concerned, there's really not much else to them, other than your partner always attacking along in the post-game overworld now, which leads us to the new mons and the game's total selection. Because of course, there is new actual stuff. While the original games only had the Pokedex of the first 3 generations of the mainline Pokemon games. But here, they add a game-breaking 32 total Pokemon to the game. 30 serving as evolutions or even pre-evolutions to those that existed prior, and 2 that only existed in the game's sequels. Giving more options, which is always great, but due to how stats work, leaves most of the new additions to feeling a little half-baked to say the very least. And that we'll have more on later. As for now, the team system. While the originals were a bit of a mess in the team building department, it's been simplified much more to an enjoyable extent. Were you sure have team slots like that of Super, the team member sizes simply do not matter. Do you want to run 3 massive Pokemon? Go for it, bestie. It's possible. Otherwise, the restrictions are gone, and that is good. While that covers your team, the partner recruiting side of things is notably more convenient, as you don't need empty team slots at all anymore, as now you get a whole 5 extra recruitment slots in a dungeon period. And while it's already working wonders for recruiting new friends and stacking rare qualities, hold on, we'll get there. The real treat is just how much more accessible the information regarding Pokemon is. You'll know if you have the friend camp unlocked when recruiting a mon, or if the mon in question is already owned, and the latter comes in without even needing the menu. But here, we're even granted 3 extra recruitment methods. Job-related recruits that you're not able to turn down for some reason, the post-game exclusive mystery house requiring an item for a random buddy, or randomly generated mons that add a massive variety to the main game, only from feeding them apples. Man, these mons do not ever stop spawning. Just let me play the damn game. In fact, this is a very helpful addition to make many of the post-game mons available during the main story, alongside most of the friend camps in this game being made immediately available, despite a lot of them being pricey. And when we throw in the EXP changes on top as well, surprise, you'll actually have Pokemon to recruit without it being a massive time sink to make them work, because they'll be able to work close to when you get them and long after, which was a pretty mandatory change to make recruitment work as a feature in the first place. Also, yes, the friend areas are referred to camps now, essentially being forced into menus, even featuring sprite work based on the original games. It's truly based and awesome. Now, the battle system is where the remake gets way more into it, as so much was done to superify the game up to a standard of pure goodness. And to make the game better, they started with an outlandishly stupid decision: removing the regular attack. While Gates may have nerfed it into the ground, leaving the regular attack with basically no use in the slightest, here, it's been officially put out of its misery. For you anyways. Sometimes they still appear from other mons, but it's incredibly rare and not noteworthy. Overall, a sad removal, particularly for Shedinja answers, but otherwise, it's not that big of a deal. real. While that's neat and all, just using attacks becomes more tolerable as well. In the originals and their sequels, because of course, you had a single button hotkey to use an attack without the need of menuing. And now every attack can be found just from holding down a button. And yes, these are all completely mappable to your heart's content. While it's not new to the series, it's just very valuable as a quality of life feature. Combat also grants us this weird chance to just attack twice. No extra PP usage or anything, just a random chance to go again. While its addition is pretty favorable to you and your teammates as well, the gameplay's obscene hit rates kind of balance it out to an extent. And then once room-wide attacks get involved, it just ruins everything. But hey, look how fun it is. Who cares if it's a problematic feature? The game also removed friendly fire on most attacks, meaning yes, you can attack foes through others without needing an IQ skill. But most importantly, the leader change feature is made way more accessible now. Granted, pretty much out the gate immediately, and it's not even restricted to post-game only anymore, meaning you'll actually use it now. And the best part, the lost condition of your playable Pokemon feigning no longer applies unless it's a team wipe, instantly swapping the leader on death, giving you more opportunities to keep going in a very tight situation. Nice change overall, but how often are you going to do this? You're obviously going to overinvest in your leader. One minor change that doesn't go completely unnoticed is just how much faster your hunger bar goes down. Due to the dungeon layout redesigns and expanded inventory, they made wasting item spaces on apples even more mandatory. And it's just super inconvenient, man. Just stop. One absolutely minuscule addition is the reintroduction of the speed stat, again introduced from the 3DS games. It's a number primarily used for a non-existent supply of attacks in the game. It really does not make that much of a difference when speed and travel speed are of course treated as separate things. The game even manages to feature the shove mechanic as well from Super, which of course is useful for nice movement tech such as funneling your mons down hallways or pushing them towards enemies. Good stuff. Several smaller tweaks were even included, primarily in the attack rebalancing departments. It's like Smoke Screen applying an accuracy debuff now rather than throwing up the unfair whiffer status, Powdered Snow no longer being a bootleg blizzard, and Surf attacking all allies now, just to name a few, end up being noticeable improvements for the game. One smaller but still noticeable feature for the combat would be type effectiveness, as in contrast to the originals, attacks that would have no effect on the target actively do no damage now, just because they have to. Obviously being an improvement because now your attacks actively matter more. Abilities are limited to one per Pokemon now. It's been this way for a while, and I shouldn't need to tell you how much better having less abilities will end up being. It's just less overkill. And rounding out this end of the battling sphere, duplicating attacks is just something you cannot do anymore. So no more triple blizzard plus ice beam spam can be had here. But granted the attack leveling system, this is absolutely needed. And with that, the main battling adjustments are on the table, and sadly, we're nowhere close to finishing. Yes, somebody cut the brakes on this car, and that's a bit of a problem. Like first, more super mystery dungeoning of the main gameplay, like reworking the status conditions to be less obtrusive, particularly poison and burn, just nuking your health bar on set intervals rather than just killing you non-stop. But paralysis in particular just makes playing the game insufferable, as slowed down movement and being locked out of attacking for a lifetime is essentially a death sentence. Dude, it takes longer to get out of this than it does for a new F-Zero game to release. Please stop. The weather system suffers from a similar effect, particularly with chip damage from hail or sand being pretty annoying when your team now has an inability to even heal off the damage. But now this time, we generally have more weather in the game. It's just not naturally spawning ones. But who cares about any of that when we now get to see the more flashy differences with the game? So first, the rare quality system. Okay, so get this. We take the really annoying IQ system that needed lots of investment to reach peak potential and just completely replace it with a system that stacks team-wide IQ skills but limits them to one per Pokemon, removing a lot of the fluff that just kitting out one Pokemon was, but now making it far more rewarding for kitting out the entire team and wasting far less time. Look at that, rewarding team building, just making the new system far better to play with. Moving on to a change that massively changes how you approach the game, and that's the EXP system overhaul, as the games from Gates onward all had one giant reformation in terms of EXP, a system that grants all earned EXP to all of the Pokemon you own, not just the ones in dungeons, meaning recruiting mons is not a complete waste of effort, as anything gotten in the main game can still be decently leveled after a drought of not being able to use them, as well as the post game itself, meaning recruitment during the main game is not complete garbage. Even if we have to deal with units snowballing and post-game leveling because there's just no way to shut this off. But the positives far outweigh the negatives because actually having partners is better than having partners unleveled because you simply can't. As I slipped in earlier, the attack leveling system exists once again to break every game it touches. A system rewarding any offensive attack with bonus damage, accuracy, and PP just from being used a metric load of times, or through a ridiculous family of items. It's fun, but absolutely not healthy, especially as it leads attacks to miss non-stop early into having them, and in terms of late game, it allows for the multi-hit moves and screen nukes to instantly outclass any kind of regular single target attacks in the game, making most of those completely worthless. In terms of items, outside of removing a handful of items, notably the evolution items in the old gummies, we get a load of items added in as replacements. Stuff like extra apple sizes, PP healers, rare quality items, wands, and more. The big notable change, yes, actual change, is the game's permission to actually allow orbs to work against bosses instead of doing nothing. You know, the entire reason the wands even exist in the first place, giving you more broken tools to bully the bosses with. And plus, you get a notably larger inventory this time around as well, which is just beautiful. In terms of dungeons, not that much was done in altering what exists. Sure, there's a terrain generation, but otherwise, outside of compressing the final size of floors down, or at least it seems that way until we get way larger spam of rooms that take an eternity to go through that all manage to look the same, which leads to a lot of dungeons, especially in the late game, feeling needlessly longer than they have any right to be, which again sucks a lot with the hunger system being nerfed alongside it, forcing more apples down your throat every beating second of the day. A few returning dungeons, specifically Western Cave and Uproar Forest, had their total lengths cut down, killing off a 99 floor dungeon, making it 20 instead, and dropping Uproar Forest from 10 floors to 4, making it both notable and tolerable. Mount Faraway even becomes longer by 20 extra floors, alongside Meteor Cave just having a rework, still requiring you to KO a specific foe to move on, but this time, not leaving the entire cave completely empty and wasting hunger time. Which is great considering this dungeon is one that benefited from the floor redesigns. Anyways, in terms of dungeons, we get Oddity Cave opened up by default and not some nonsense event, and a new dungeon that only appears after losing, just so you can actually have items after having your hopes and dreams crushed. In terms of minor mechanical changes that remain for dungeons, we get left with 2 real things remaining. And yes, I say 2 because we're just going to completely write off the bonus money you can get from the dungeon bonus. Who really cares about that? It doesn't make that big of a difference. But that leads us to traps, which yes, there are new ones. They do end up spawning noticeably earlier in the game than they probably should, which is not that pleasant. Also, the main game has this habit of showing you where all the mons, items, and objectives on the floor are for free. You don't even need x-ray specs during the main game. This kind of overkill, but it's the main game exclusive. It's kind of soft on purpose. In terms of actual new content, these tough foes can appear in a dungeon as well. Default by post-game and after the main story run of the maps, some dungeons can have a set mini boss that sometimes show up, and they're pretty powerful while packing nice EXP rewards. The main upside is this grants us a small list of shiny Pokemon to recruit for the first time in a mystery dungeon game outside of Japan. Or of course, you can just use it as an excuse to test your luck on the boxes they drop. The awakening system from Super returns as well for some reason. By using a very specific item, you can get some overkill stat boosts and even stronger linked attacks, while just generally ignoring typings in the abilities that are permanent for the current dungeon, unless some nonsense like a trap or death hit you out of nowhere to remove the status. Oh yeah, and this is how you Mega Evolve as well. But don't be fooled, the wild encounters can also get these crazy benefits as well, just by KOing one of your teammates without you reviving them, KOing another wild mon, or a very specific group of boss fights. These guys get scary, and it's a nice back and forth that the mainline games could never do even if they tried. Which finally leaves us with 2 last things for this one section that probably shouldn't be this long. Firstly, the post-game sees the removal of HM requirements to access some of its dungeons, meaning sick, you can stop wasting your team space or backspace just to get access to a dungeon. Look at that, a problem removed. And lastly, being a pretty big feature, is bosses retaining their damage should you fail their fight. It's a main story only edition, but it is exactly what it sounds like. If you die, your damage on the boss will carry over. While it may seem broken or something of that sort, there's some critical thinking to be had here, as this change helps the game more than it hurts. Because remember, in the originals, if you die against the boss, you lose your items, which essentially made your next attempts against the boss notably harder than they were the first time due to losing all of your tools for success, and then needing to try again at an even worse position. And in some cases, it could flat out prevent you from progressing the story at all, long you could be stuck here. Think about Mount Blaze and Frosty Force, for example. You're not able to go back and grind items, you simply have to suck it up and brute force the game. Where with Rayquaza and some of the other boss fights, you could always go grind out other stuff like Reviver Seeds and the such. But above all, it helps you not get stuck at the most important parts of the game, while flat out not hindering the post game whatsoever, which will lead those fights to being incredibly tough, all things considered. Which means we finished this absolute monolith of a section. And while I probably did miss stuff, sadly that's just the nature of how these type of videos work, meaning finally we can reach the playthrough specific stuff. So with our basic gameplay on the table, how is actually playing through it? Well, it's complicated. Thankfully, in terms of the game's progression, it's not too shabby at least, as the first 2 dungeons you unlock just by playing the main story as intended. Mount Steel and Sinister Woods have an annoying habit of needing you to do an amount of jobs before those parts of the story can be played. After those, Silent Chasm, Mount Thunder, and Great Canyon are all unlocked from beating the maps that come before them, so no filler content is needed here. Afterwards, you're forced into doing Lapis Cave, Mount Blaze, Frosty Force, and Mount Freeze back to back with no way of even going back to your base, completely preventing just about any distractions you could go through, all while completely locking you out of recruiting mods. Although technically there are optional maps, you're probably never touching these, even if grinding these look appealing. After this point though, progressing the story is just not very fun, as not only do you have to do more jobs, you have to go through the base construction arc, where you'll likely need to repeat Uproar Forest a few times for items to progress the game. Do more jobs, and then you finally get to go off to Magma Cavern, conquer that, and then go off to Sky Tower to finish the game. Progressing the game overall is not too bad, as the main story beats are very easy to move along with, but the pacing is not fun. Still better than the sequels though, as of course having to do X amount of jobs to reach a few of the earlier game dungeons is not fun, but the pre-Magma Cavern stuff just goes a bit overboard and really overstays its welcome. Really feeling like a slog, and the one dungeon you do have to go through at this point is just extremely underwhelming difficulty-wise, to say the least. And it really doesn't contribute much to the plot either. Look, these 2 interruptions are annoying, but it's not that bad when the Explorer games are much more problematic in this regard. And generally speaking, the PMD1 experience is not that long of a game, and the game's probably better off for it. But hey, wait, I just said the D word a few minutes ago. Yes, gentlemen, difficulty. The level curve and difficulty of Mystery Dungeon 1 is odd to say the very least. The GBA DS versions are honestly not that hard, all things considered. Level-wise, it's not too problematic, but it can be pretty easy to fall behind, especially when you're actively taking the job grinding sections and minimizing it as much as humanly possible. Maybe the Fugitive arc will be a little bit problematic at times, as the dungeon length type matchups and other nonsense can make it pretty brutal at points, potentially encouraging you to throw yourself at a wall until you're decently leveled, but afterwards, it's not too bad. Just coming down to difficulty through long dungeons, stronger stat balls, and potential monster houses being the real threats. Ending the main game off level-wise somewhere between 25 to 35, on average. Overall, the original versions of Mystery Dungeon 1 are not too shabby here, but DX on the other hand, oh boy! While the game does feature more interesting starting movesets and the attack leveling system, you would think it would make the games easier, and oh boy, I wish that were the case. Sure, the early game and even late post-game could be easier generally speaking, but once the legendary bosses start showing up is when things really get problematic, as grinding through the Makihita Dojo will end up feeling pretty mandatory to not waste hours at Mount Blaze, or the late game in general, as EXP is just a little too sparse, unless a very specific rare quality is involved. Right, bosses. See, in the original versions, these do exist, and outside of Articuno in the main game, they're all pretty mandatory manageable, not packing some cheap nonsense that'll wipe you instantly for existing with room-wide attacks. Yveltal and Dialga, I'm looking at both of you, what the hell? But back then, they were typically trivial, but could be sketchy with a bad game plan. Now here, they were cranked up quite a bit. As firstly, now the main bosses in the game are now naturally larger, granting them much more reach with their close-range attacks, and even their ranged ones, which is one thing, but now, not only do they typically hit harder, their HP is just kind of absurd. In the context of Zapdos and Groudon, they expect you to have recruited a literal army along the way to fight them. They had to balance this around a team of 8 Mons. But as for Moltres, Articuno, and Rayquaza, it just kinda ends up hurting. Especially with Rayquaza and kind of Groudon, as even looking at the postgame for a bit, Kyogre, Lugia, and Ho-Oh all have these obnoxious and personalized field effects that really just end up messing with the flow of the entire battle, making item play far more mandatory, or of course, room-wide attacking moves. There's more to talk about with the bosses and the context around their gameplay later, so we'll hold on to a few more points, but wow, they actually made the bosses bosses. Or at least a few of them hard in this game. Good job. Even if dying and them retaining their damage kind of defeats the purpose. Which of course leaves us with a post-game analysis. And with PMD1, it's a bit of a mess across the board, as you gotta start by going through the Stormy Sea and battling Kyogre to gain access to basically everything else from completing their obscure requirements, most of which require completing other post-game story bits. In the originals, you gotta get access to the Surf HM, which is pretty tedious, and in the context of the Latios and Latios bit, even needing to buy a costly friend area first. But here, 2 paths do emerge. You gain the ability to go on a quest to get the Rainbow Wing from battling all 3 of the legendary cats. Yes, see, a lion, a tiger, and a leopard, and you if you believe otherwise, of course leading you into fighting Ho-Oh. Doing this will allow you to visit the place with Mewtwo, allowing us to cut off that arc of content. While the other side has you rescuing Latios and getting 2 more paths, one where you get access to Wish Cave and later Murky Cave, while the other side has the dreadful task of getting Lugia through a 99 floor dungeon, and later Deoxys, which has the most horrible boss fight I think I've ever seen in a video game. And this is all while ignoring the Smeargle quest that you can get immediately going into the post game. Although going into the remake in particular, more of the annoying stuff is gone, like the Rex of the Surf HM and other jank, but with those pros, one massive con remains. The fact they expect you to walk out of the main story and battle this monstrosity without grinding. Okay, so imagine this, right? Take my Ultra Necrozma rant from Usum and then multiply it by 4. If you don't have specifically Rayquaza on your team, yes, Primal Groudon's not gonna work that well, you're gonna have an awful time. Especially when Phase 2 comes around and Kyogre goes Primal, because of course he really needs it. The amount of damage you end up taking and even dealing is just blatantly not fun or fair to deal with at all. And this trait of Phase 2s is actually shared across the post-game fights of Groudon and Rayquaza, as well as Mewtwo to a lesser extent. But the fact that your only realistic answer is pretty out of the way and arguably harder is sure as hell not a good sign at making this approachable to beat. Of course, made worse by being in a dungeon with 40 floors and no dungeon checkpoints. Meaning one fail and you gotta repeat it all? Try again? Oh look, it's still not enough. Essentially hard locking you to this point of the game, which locks you out of doing anything else in the post game, excluding the Smeargle stuff, at a much higher intensity than any part of story progression that's ever been probably in Pokemon. And yes, sadly I'm talking through experience. This battle just sucks so much ween. And it ends up shackling what would otherwise be the better post-game experience. And this part of the script here makes no sense. And generally speaking, not only the general post-game just a neat to pick at, but it's generally pretty neat and meaty. If you can make sense of that gibberish, congratulations, you know more than me despite the fact I wrote it down. Overall, the post-game's pretty nice, but a bit of a mess. And generally speaking, the rest of the actual game and progression itself is too. But not in a way that manages to tear it down. On the feature side of things with Mystery Dungeon 1, things get a little bit interesting or something. So first, let's just bulldoze our way through the town stuff. As you'd expect, the game has storage system for its items and money. Bank that works exactly as you'd expect. Put money in, take money out, that's all, no hassle involved. Money of course being used for multiple purposes, primarily the shop. Intended obviously to acquire dummy items and bonkers TMs for devious dungeons, plotting to a greater success. Even featuring a mixed selection of both when found in a dungeon. And of course, due to this game's very limited inventory, the storage is used to holster all of your access goods to be extracted later. It's exactly as you'd expect again. And luckily for us, that's the good storage system that stacks all of the same type of gear rather than cluttering your storage. Mystery Dungeon 2! But with that said, those are the most basic and useful features in the game. But staying in the town for a second, the Gulpin Link Shop is here to break the game, packing two features, the lesser one of value being a move reminder bootleg that gives a forgotten level of attack at the cost of free for some reason, and the obscenely busted system that is move linking. I mentioned it earlier, but the value in spamming multiple attacks is crazy unfair, may I try saying. The fact it only costs 150 monies, or free through an item, is simply not okay, as the regular attack simply existing means you're not exhausting all the PP of your link attacks, meaning yes, you can dodge the moves automatically unlinking. It's just stronger than it has any right being. Congrats Gulpin, you just made terrors beyond our mortal comprehension. Unlike Makuhita, who comes with a pretty useless feature all things considered, hosting the Makuhita Dojo. They are just 3 floor dungeons to go through, featuring a mediocre boss fight at the end. Ooh, scary. That's literally it. Pretty pointless all things considered. Like, it's actually pointless. Oh, but the Bonsly fig, shut up. Nobody cares. And with that, we have to move over to something so small and trivial for features. This will be saving. Yeah, the fact that saving is being mentioned at all would typically be a red flag, but not really in this case. Sadly, it's only restricted to the bed and any Kangaskhan rocks you might come across during a dungeon or out of dungeon. Well, that part might be a little more limiting than people would like. Wait a second, Kangaskhan? Yeah, that's the main reason we're here. A save button with access to the storage, but only outside of a dungeon. How convenient and a bit of a waste of time in the context of this video. But saving can't stop here, as a minor mentioning of quick saving existing needs to be brought up. As it's mainly used for saving mid-dungeon, it allows the game to save, but it actually doesn't should the game turn off after mid-dungeon or something. The only reason I'm mentioning this here at all is because this mainly plagues a lot of the post-game map entries. How fun, but maybe a sense of progression could be deemed fun? Luckily, there is one with the team ranks and job systems. From the From the Pelipper post office board, the front side of the mailbox, very specific here, that the remake would never ruin, and the main menu, kind of, you are granted the ability to take on jobs. Of course, being those mid-dungeon objectives previously mentioned, you give yourself a bit of a challenge or a reason in general to repeat content. Play these randomly generated missions, or one that could totally be generated on websites to totally take advantage of any reward ever, all in an effort to earn points to rank up, granting you better recruit chances, and yeah, that's about it. Pretty half-baked all things considered, but it's a grind worth considering. Moving on, we reach a feature that you would probably use if the recruitment, and particularly the EXP system, wasn't as restricting as it is, would be evolution. Unlocked immediately after beating the game, you get the ability to evolve your Pokemon from this little cave. And wow, this evolution system is not good. So evolving a Pokemon works similarly to that of the main games. Ones that want levels are potentially dreadful, especially granted the EXP system, and more importantly the team size thing, which is going to heavily limit the amount of mons you can funnel the EXP into. Other evolutions are where things get messy though, as anything that wants a stone to evolve just requires a hefty amount of luck to even find the stone in the first place. Of course, without exploiting the Wonder Mail system. Anything from the mainline games that want trading to evolve actually don't require some awful gimmick like that, as they now have the link cable, yeah, that thing from Legends Arceus, which goes off to function just like an extra stone, which also sucks as it's of course an RNG hell to find. The trade evolutions requiring items are even worse because get this, an RNG check, but you need another RNG based item to evolve. Made worse when there's just so many of them. Feebas is essentially just giving a stone evolution now but a scarf. Former friendship evolutions now evolve from having a higher IQ? Am I reading this right? Meaning you just need to funnel a load of gummies into them that you'd rather be infinitely funneling into your more useful mines, rather than something you're coping about the potential of. Oh yeah, by the way, Umbreon and Espeon also need an extra item because the game hates you in particular. And while that covers it for the mons, it somehow gets worse. As to even evolve a mon, you will have to remove every single mon from your team, pop into a friend area, find the mon you're trying to evolve, make that one the lead, bench the mon you just were, run into the cave and do your thing, and then repeat it for everyone else you want to evolve, every time while potentially needing to grab those items. While you can see if a Pokemon is ready to evolve via a menu, this little song and dance of benching mons constantly is just not pleasant at all. And it slows down a system that already hurts to do because how much you have to do to make a mon realistically work. It's just tedious every time. And from one tedium to another, this time something way different is the flag. In the post-game, after doing a side quest for the Smeargle, you get the ability to change your flag. While it's neat, it comes down to random chance, which of course is never pleasant. And the remake actually making a choice just goes to prove how bad this game's execution was. Primarily because you cannot even see the options that you want in the GBA and DS versions. While being forced to skip an entire day worth of time just to see the flag change, you end up wasting so much time just to get what you want. It's neat, but a little bit troubled. But something truly troubled is the fact that yes, even in a spin-off, that it was somehow impossible for us to escape the poisonous clutches of HMs. While TMs exist and are still single use unless recycled, HMs, of course, just like the mainline games, are unlimited use. The catch here is the simple fact that they're mandatory either to be taught to a mon or be wasting your precious inventory space just to enter some of the maps in the post-game. The real issue is the likes of Fly, which is not that important, and Surf, very important, are never guaranteed for the player to pick up. So they have to gamble away time with keys and unrelated dungeons just to hopefully be able to progress the post-game story, meaning you very well might just end up wasting your time just trying to get to the part where you actually get to play the game. But when the game physically cannot be progressed because of this, it just sucks a little too much. Although there is one thing in the game, or games, I do find laughable. It's the inclusion of version exclusives. Where Blue Rescue Team would typically win out for just having a 2-screen display, the simple fact that version exclusive Pokemon both exist and flat out do not even matter is just ludicrous. Okay, so there's a very, very, very limited pool of Pokemon that do not appear in one version, but they do in the other. The catch is though, if you do a job featuring any of these Pokemon, they'll flat out just start spawning in the game regardless of which version is being played, meaning they're not even technically exclusives, which honestly is just pathetic. How did this even get greenlighted? Speaking of features that just don't make any sense, there's an option in the game to trade items. It allows you to send an item from one game to another. Look man, the feature does what it says, so it has use cases no matter how non-existent. Which leaves us with an actual good feature at the end, being the friend rescuing feature. Essentially, if a player falls in a dungeon, this feature allows another player to come and be their savior, play the exact same dungeon on their end, to pick the first player back up where they'll probably fall again. It's a cool feature all things considered, but they really didn't make this very practical in the grand scheme of things, especially when you have to set up the rescue in the first place. But hey, you get to talk to the big man, so it's worth it. Overall, leaving the game off pretty nicely, but of course the room for improvement is vast and you'll see why. And then when we turn over to Mystery Dungeon DX, it's a lot of the same, but more, focusing on a few new additions and some major reworks. The first addition is just flat out a feature that never needed to exist at all. By holding down a button, you can initiate the auto battle feature, where the game straight up plays itself for you. Sure, your partners may be playing themselves already, but now you can too. But one hysterical flaw is just how you can't enter auto battle or even fight mons if there's an enemy nearby. Like my man, you literally cannot even let the game fight for you. What is the point? Ignoring that pointless feature and looking at a small but really obvious change is the sheer lack of version exclusives. Obviously, because it's a single game and the simple fact that version exclusives in Mystery Dungeon just really never worked means yes, everyone is truly here by default. It's an obvious win and nothing more. Now, looking at something pretty important in the grand scheme of things is the reworked camp system. As mentioned earlier, friend areas with a fresh coat of paint being a menu only thing, as pretty much most friend areas are buyable right off rip, and the ability to buy the camps through an orb mid-dungeon in emergency, alongside expanded recruitment counts from ranking up, and obviously the EXP receivable from not even battling, easier evolutions that we'll get into later, and more importantly the legendary bosses being recruited without the need for luck anymore, as getting getting them guaranteed on their first or potential rematch, unless it's Mew, then you can suffer. All of these just end up improving this system drastically. Again, with all the babbling I did earlier, it's important to realize that this doesn't completely fix the recruitment system. Obviously, working like any games to follow would help, you know, the camp's not existing at all. But of course, this is a drastic improvement, all things considered, with one funny inconsistency, where unlike the originals, now due to the leader change thing not affecting the overworld play, you and your partner never get sent off to friend areas, and because of that, you do not get their species-specific friend areas when they finally open up. So you get instances where you recruit them on of you or your main partner, but you're not able to keep them. And this piece of gameplay was the only reason I remember this feature being a thing at all. Pushing towards the town features, the biggest glow up in the entire game went to the Makuhita Dojo. Being swapped out from whatever it was before, you know, a waste of time, we get a dungeon littered with enemies featuring massive EXP and attack EXP bonuses. Clearly meant for you to take a single mon to grind it way more effectively. The problem is that feeling of being pretty mandatory for main game leveling, and the simple fact that only the active Pokemon gets the XP is a bit of a bummer, but a pretty mandatory decision. Same could be said about the timer, which is unfortunately here but needed to be here, which can sometimes be problematic with multi-hit moves, linked attacks, and especially the free second attack, as they can just come out and just eat your time. But remember, this used to be a pretty pointless feature, all things considered. So not being that is way better, especially when it's a feature that you will actively use and want to use. Well done. The Gulpin Link shop, of course, had to join in on the fun as well, as now it gets better by 2 steps. Linking attacks is free now, finally making it more appealing than just using a link box, which the feature is actively made stronger due to the linked attacks no longer delinking should one attack run out of PP. Look, this feature was irrelevant and starving for any kind of buffs, to maybe be considered as not the weakest feature in the entire game. Almost like you can taste the sarcasm coming out of my mouth. This did not need more buffs. But of course, blowing that out of the park, kind of like Super did, is the addition of a full-blown move tutor. Being post-game exclusive is honestly fine, granted how powerful some of these attacks can be. Just like giving your Pokemon access to Earth Power and Heat Wave without the need for some luck-based TM nonsense like Blizzard, just so you can go off and break the game because you really need it. Great addition, glad to see it's here, and yes, just for clarification, the move reminder is still here for the main game, left completely untouched. Good job, Gulpin, you're still a powerhouse. The Kecleon shops even received a minor rework as well. The purple one no longer sells orbs and exclusively stocks TMs. Meanwhile, the green one now stocks orbs because he has to. Is this good? Is it bad? You tell me. I think it's good. And while not really a feature, the whole event with Munchlax now spawns significantly more frequently. Now, just in case that's something you want to know about, he's there. It's not as rare anymore. Bit of a bummer, but hey, at least you'll see him. Evolution got a minor change this time around to be notably more simple. While it's still a post-game feature, now any mon that required exclusive items to evolve or some other circumstances, like a water stone, link cable, or something of the sort, now they've all been simplified to just needing evolution crystals to fulfill the role of the items, making evolution items far easier to farm, while being notably more easy to work around for any of the returning or new evolutions, which of course is accessibility done right. Split evolutions are also done a little bit better, as of course you can see them from a menu and just see what you can get. Just making the evolution system more convenient across the board, especially when you don't have to do any friend area nonsense. Glad to see it's tolerable now. Moving on, the team ranks also got a bit of a rework, but that's because they added a bunch more ranks and rewards, so a lot more ranks to chip at while you play the game for what seems like an eternity. Now holstering all the Gen 4 statues here this time, while allowing you to earn more backspace, camp space, extra space for jobs despite the fact the Pelipper post office will never upgrade, and you get extra team presets. Congrats, they made the feature way more worth it getting involved with. A big change that will haunt my dreams for as long as I live is the game's forced autosave feature. Yep, the game saves automatically now with no manual saving at all. No, not even a toggle. While it is more convenient and generally better objectively, the sheer lack of assurance from doing it yourself is the easiest way for a game to give you trust issues. But on a silly note, this change means all of the game's Kangaskhan rocks no longer have save features, and the ones from the stage midpoints are actually storages now instead of just being a save point. Again, just silly, but something to at least point out. The Wonder Mail system of this game is not the same really as it was in the originals, as there it was a way to share jobs with others or rig the entire job system. In these games, it's essentially a password system like that of the mystery gifts in the mainline games or even the Rumble games. Just free items or missions to recruit certain Pokemon, and that's it. It's not much, but the free items in particular can go a long way. And being neutered means the game cannot be completely broken in half. Although with that note, it's time for our last feature that actually is relevant, which is the ability to use one of your own teams to rescue yourself from gates has returned for some heinous reason. So the ability to rescue your friends can now be done for yourself with a completely different team. Honestly, it's fine all things considered. Listen man, it's modern day. We need more accessibility stuff like this. We can't overly rely on people. Yes, the old system still does exist in the game, but I mean, just do it yourself. The EXP system makes this completely reasonable as well. And with that rescue, you get to keep going and live happily ever after. Just like the features themselves, baby. Meaning it's time to steer away from the gameplay because good lord, all of this has been a mouthful and then some. Looking towards the nicer things we take for granted sometimes, we'll be peeking at the musical and graphical side of the game, which, with the Pokemon Mystery Dungeon games, is typically the best part of the entire series. With the music first, it's just a complete banger fest. Just absolute peak. While it's magic to your ears, there's a minor catch here, and that's the fact that the background music for the Red and Blue Rescue Team is not made equal, as due to the systems in question, not every single musical piece in the game sounds the exact same between the two versions. It's harder to explain without an example, so prep your ears. We're using Mount Blaze as an example because it's the most obvious one. Look man, these differences are small, but they can sure as hell be noticeable, which on average leaves Red Rescue Team just sounding a bit better across the board between the originals. However, Rescue Team DX pulls up with its own musical offering being mostly made up of remixes of the originals. While personally speaking, they don't do much to outdo the originals on average, they do provide fun alternatives that help the remake have a sense of identity. You know, something you would expect from remakes to do. However, looking at the graphics, we aren't going to strike gold twice, sadly. In the originals, the graphics are flat out timeless. Excellent sprite work that will go down in history as one of, if not Pokemon's best art styles across the board. From the Pokemon to the environment, it's just that good. Yeah, there's a few funnies in the game. Grovyle appears a good example of being this weird turquoise color rather than being green, but it's a part of the charm. Now, Rescue Team DX, oh boy, this sure is an oddball. It takes a 3D approach with this weird storybook-ish art style, I think. Overall, the styling's pretty nice all things considered. It just takes some getting used to. The not so good part of the graphics is not the environment, but the Pokemon models. As for some reason, ever since Pokemon X and Y, Pokemon games just struggle in the Pokemon model department. And here is no exception. For the most part, it's just the models that look odd sitting through these stylized environments. I wouldn't say that it helps that much when the actual textures just look weird on the Pokemon, especially when they move around during spouts of dialogue. Leaving it at the textures itself, some of the 3D model work is not sized well. Like, take Rayquaza for instance. I get that he's big, but good lord, this man is massive to a point of being an issue. But who really cares about that when we got a way cooler Snake in this game? Look at that perfection. BDSP wishes it had a man tuned to absolute peak perfection the way Ekans is in this game. Perfect stance, perfect movement. Perfect. Damn, I wish that was me. So yeah, one set of games whose visuals have aged like gold, and another that'll probably age well graphically, but that's just a guess. All around, making for a great experience both visually and audibly. The story side of the original Mystery Dungeon games goes down as one of the stories of all time. It's not bad or anything, it's just not a long one or really impactful in any sense of the imagination. Just really prioritizing stuff like the world building while putting the more interesting storytelling bits on the back burner. So in the beginning, a voice starts by prying every single one of your secrets out so it can judge you. Seconds later, you awaken in the Pokemon world. Memories wiped with only your name and past as a human known to you. All while you're meeting with your future bestie and being told about a rescue or something, meaning it's game time. One dungeon later, Caterpie's rescued and it's time to figure out what you could even do with your life. So of course you join your tool of a partner as a rescue team, of course, being an obvious title drop. Yes, it had to happen. And with that, you develop your legacy by rescuing some Magnemite and a Diglett before getting introduced to loads of characters of minor importance like Shiftry and Alakazam's teams. But Team Meanies is the important one for now, as these guys are just a bunch of low-life scum. Not only stealing your job offers, but willing to stop one of your rescues because, of course, they had to. And it's a very important step in world domination. I mean, come on, man. Don't judge them. They have it all figured out. Although, sadly, after this point, they just go on to the back burner a bit until the post-game. Or that's at least with the funny two. Thankfully, we get to see Gengar a bit later. But a debacle from slightly earlier in the game proceeds to rear its head. Azamon is stuck and needs some help. Not only was Shiftry guilted into doing it, but he clearly never returned. It turns out after the dungeon, he got walloped, and now you gotta go off to Mount Thunder to rescue him. And no way, good work, you did it! Although, did you really do it? Because Alakazam really susses out your true identity as a non-Pokemon Pokemon. Seems like you didn't do a good job on covering that one up. Obviously, things are a bit devious, but that's not your issue yet. A desert is. Lots of dialogue is dropped, and it leaves issues that'll come up the next day, just being storytelling of a human leaving their disgusting, grotesque creature behind. Betrayal or something like that, and how Zatu's rambling the day before makes it appear this human's existence could be causing the world to end. But of course, being the doddering degenerate that Gengar is, he takes the knowledge of the curse and ties it to the only known human, you, to make you die. More dialogue goes down where you're at least shown some mercy to get a head start on fleeing. That way dying becomes optional. And despite your partner not really being a part of this and not wanting to turn against you, they'll go alongside you and you both go off as fugitives, trekking across the entire continent against all odds, fighting through multiple dungeons, bosses, and unplayable terrains, at least teaching us that no matter how bleak and hopeless life ends up becoming, the only way to go is forward, and that giving up is never an option. And while I'd say the other games try to throw in this theming as well, this one just hits right by focusing exclusively on it, rather than also having loads more, and it works so damn well in this case. Thankfully, after an encounter with relatively useless Pokemon that actually gets one extra line of dialogue in the remake, a very unfortunate battle gets to take place and is interrupted in the nick of time, dropping some raw facts, clearing your name, and making the trek worth it, allowing life once more. Stuff happens, Gengar gets told off, and everyone lives happily ever after. Or not, as Groudon awakens and Alakazam and friends really seem to think they're better or something by going to silence him. And with that, weeks pass, base renovation goes down, a rescue party is sent, and completely wallops. So now it's your turn to step in and rescue Alakazam and friends. But of course, actually succeed because of this little thing called plot armor. Now you get to weirdly see Tyranitar and Charizard teleport into the room, despite already being defeated in the previous room. Why does this happen again? That's cool and all, but bad news. There's an incoming meteor, and the problem is you're the only one capable of fixing it. So after plot, an update to your limited mortality coming up very soon, totally dodging insta-death from ominous wind spamming Masquerain, and knocking some sense into Rayquaza, the big man is able to destroy the meteor in a manner that is 80 trillion times cooler than that nonsense from Oras. And with that, the day is saved for real this time, meaning it's time for you to ascend back to your human life, leaving your bestie all alone in this world in a semi-heartbreaking finish. And the credits roll, baby. You did it. Yes! But sadly, since postgame exists, you get to come back through the power of friendship and be the best super friends ever too, registered trademark. Thankfully, in terms of the postgame, there's not too much here, with quite literally one standout regarding Gengar, as yes, he turned out to be the human from the Ninetales curse. And it turns out he's the one who ditched the Gardevoir that you end up dreaming about during the main game, you disgusting creature. Shame on you. And all it took to break him was knowing that he left a very positive lasting impact on Gardevoir back before all the bad things happened. Well, meanwhile, he just sat there living in ignorance all until the events of the main story, able to redeem himself regardless of the consequences that come from her never knowing that it was indeed him. But outside of that one detail, the postgame story is really not a story, just tying up loose ends at best and allowing you to find some legendaries, meaning we'll cut it here. What? Do we really need to talk about Smeargle not wanting to become an adult because getting sticky is bad? Just let the man enjoy his virginity rock shirt and move on. Which leaves us us with a relatively okay-ish story, where nothing really hooks you in with crazy storytelling or anything, but at least has something going for it in terms of underlying theming of never giving up when the going gets rough. So at least there's something. Although sadly, this does mean it's time for us to wrap up this little excursion that is Mystery Dungeon 1. So, how about that title? Why did Mystery Dungeon succeed where other spin-offs failed? That would likely come down to the world building and perspective, giving us a world where you play as a Pokemon to live out your hidden desires to be a furry, by experiencing their world with actual, but somewhat lacking characters, hitting an extent of immersion where other spin-offs just simply could not match. And of course, the story's got a little bit of an underlying tone to it. Although, of course, looking at the gameplay side of things, it was able to oddly adapt the Pokemon formula to a dungeon crawler with varying results, but notably better than other attempts to do the same with other spin-offs. People may never blatantly overhype the gameplay, as it just kind of works, and is fun enough without defying all expectations. Well, in the original that is, but it gets even better in the remake, which subjectively we could sit here and agree to disagree on how much one enjoys which version of the game more, but in a more objective approach, the remake addressing plenty of the shortcomings of the originals just makes it more superior and competent overall. Throw in a popping soundtrack and lovely visuals that still manage to blow away some modern games out of the park, just as the icing on top, it makes for an all-around satisfying experience. Finally made better by it itself being a pretty short game, all things considered. Which of course brings us to the real question of the video. Should you play Pokemon Mystery Dungeon 1? My answer is both a yes and a maybe. The maybe in regards to the originals, while being pretty solid in its own right, it has the skill issue of sitting in the shadow of its remake, which of course is the yes here. It just made most of the game better and less tedious. Luckily for us, that's the main thing you can ask for. As for a grading, 3 stars for the original and 4 for the remake. The gap may not be that big all things considered, but that's essentially what being the same game will do, which leaves us with whites. A recommendation of bias from myself, it's pretty solid all things considered, while generally just being a nice and pleasant experience. But of course, personally, I just love the learning curve, how fun it can be to exploit AI, and of course take advantage of some completely broken strategies. And of course, my favorite part of it all, the move leveling system giving me plenty of reasons to come back and grind for days on end, and I think that's probably the best part. Listen, I know when nobody got my back, the PMD1 remake does have my back. Love it to death. Anyways, ladies and gentlemen, that's been it for Pokemon Mystery Dungeon 1. A nice time that probably could have been a bit better had I had gone through covering both the original and remake separately. But here we are, I suppose. So as always, thank you for watching. Consider subscribing to see when I drop the Explorers of Sky video. And until next time, can you please just stop teleporting away just to click recover so this battle's completely unwinnable?